Medieval Europe. A woman screams in the dark, her breath rattling like a dying animal. The priest clutches holy water, ready to baptize the baby, if it even breathes. The midwives pray not for survival, but for a miracle. Because in this world, pregnancy is not the gift of life. It's a death sentence. 1 in 3 women will never rise from this bed. Infection, blood loss, or the knife of a desperate surgeon will decide her fate. But death wasn't the only danger. Survival could be worse. If you lived in the Middle Ages, you would not survive pregnancy. And if by some chance you did, the church, superstition, or even your neighbors might make sure you didn't. This is the nightmare history of childbirth in the medieval world. Survival could be worse. Pregnancy in the Middle Ages began in fear. Women weren't seen as blessed, but as cursed vessels, walking toward death with every growing month. Families lit candles and burned incense not to celebrate, but to keep demons away. Midwives tied charms of bones, iron, or herbs to the mother's wrists, believing they could ward off evil spirits that caused miscarriages. But no amulet could stop what was coming. Church authorities preached that childbirth pain was Eve's punishment for original sin. Every contraction wasn't just biology, it was divine retribution. And so women screamed, not just in agony, but in terror that their suffering was God's wrath. For most, the ending was predictable. The sheets stained red, the chamber silent, the candles extinguished. The mother's body carried out while the newborn's cries, if they came at all, were swallowed by church. Bells tolling for the dead. If the child lived even a few moments, priests rushed to baptize it. Without baptism, a dead infant's soul was believed to wander limbo forever. Families begged priests to pour water over dying lips, praying heaven would claim at least one life from the blood-soaked bed. Coffins small enough to hold both mother and child became tragically common. In some towns, the graveyard for women of childbearing age grew faster than any battlefield. But surviving childbirth didn't always mean salvation. Those who survived often lingered in silent misery. Infection, called childbed fever, spread quickly through unwashed hands and filthy cloths. A woman could survive the screams of labor only to die slowly days later, rotting from within. Healers prescribed crushed emeralds, mercury, or even powdered wolf bones to ease delivery. Instead of helping, these poisons often killed faster than childbirth itself. For noble women, care was even deadlier. Physicians performed experimental surgeries, cut open veins for bloodletting, or forced concoctions, meant to purge the body of evil humors. Every treatment brought her closer to death. Superstition piled on suffering. Families believed witches stole babies in the womb, replacing them with changelings. Any midwife who failed too many deliveries risked being accused of witchcraft and burned for crimes she never committed. One failed birth could end not only the mother's life, but the midwife's too. Communities demanded someone to blame, and so women helping women were hunted as demons in disguise. And even if you escaped superstition, something worse awaited. When labor stalled, surgeons were summoned. Their tools were not instruments of healing, but of desperation. Iron hooks to drag a baby out, knives to cut flesh, saws to crush tiny skulls for delivery. Few survived the intervention. Priests often stood in the chamber before midwives did. Last rites were prepared long before hope. Women went into labor already half buried in the grave. In some parishes, up to half of all young women's graves were marked not by plague or famine, but by childbirth. The churchyards whispered a single truth. The womb was deadlier than war. For men, wives were replaceable. A nobleman could remarry within months, as though childbirth had simply consumed another sacrifice. But for women, pregnancy was an endless cycle of terror they could never escape. And the nightmare didn't stop at death. What happened to your body after was even worse. Bodies of mothers filled pits by the dozens. When burial costs grew too high, entire generations of women were dumped together. Nameless, their sacrifices erased. The church warned that women who died unbaptized in childbirth risked damnation. Grieving families weren't allowed to mourn. Priests used terror to turn tragedy into obedience. Some women were denied burial in holy ground if priests suspected sin had caused their failed childbirth. Their bodies lay outside city walls, cursed, feeding wild dogs instead of resting in consecrated soil. Their children were left behind, orphans raised by neighbors, often starved or abandoned. A mother's death echoed for generations, and yet folklore spread that dead mothers haunted their infants, appearing as pale spirits, desperate to cradle the child they died to bring into the world. This was the death room of the Middle Ages. You wouldn't survive pregnancy. And if you did, your life and your body would never truly be your own again. When pain became unbearable, women reached for remedies, potions brewed from crushed emeralds, poppy seeds, or ground wolf bones promised relief. But more often they poisoned both mother and child. Apothecaries offered powders made from lead, mercury, and arsenic. Sold as medicine, they were death disguised in glass jars. The cure often killed faster than the childbirth. Midwives who tried to help with herbs were branded as witches. If too many women died under their care, the blame fell not on filth, not on infection, but on their souls. The very women fighting to save lives were burned alive for it. A woman who delivered life in the morning could be executed by nightfall, accused of consorting with demons. Their screams joined the chorus of mothers they had failed to save. And even those who lived long enough to give birth faced something even crueler. For the rich, physicians often made things worse. They forced concoctions of vinegar, wine, or even molten lead, believing they could purge the body of dangerous spirits. Survival rates plummeted with every sip. The most common treatment? Bloodletting. Doctors drained the very strength women needed to survive labor. They believed a weak mother meant an easier birth, when in truth, it was a death sentence. Religion offered no greater mercy. Women clutched rosary beads as contractions tore them apart. They were told their agony was holy, that every scream brought them closer to sainthood, even if it ended in silence. Priests taught that each pain was a reminder of Eve's sin. Women were not patients. They were sinners, punished by God's will, their suffering considered righteous. Even as they lay dying, priests insisted women repent. A mother's last words weren't to her newborn, but to God, whispered through bloodied lips, desperate for forgiveness she never needed. But outside the churches, in the shadows, darker remedies awaited. Some sought forbidden cures. In secret, women shared herbs said to ease childbirth. Pennyroyal, juniper, or black hellebore. They whispered recipes under moonlight, passing knowledge from mother to daughter at risk of death. But too much pennyroyal could stop labor and stop the heart. What was meant to save often killed, leaving mothers writhing in agony, victims of their own desperate hope. Church scribes recorded these women not as healers, but as witches. In their ink, every herbal remedy became witchcraft. Every midwife a demon's servant. Even when a baby lived, mothers often didn't, and the midwife's reward for saving an infant could be the noose, their victory twisted into accusation. Worse still, the truth was erased. Records of failed births, of poisoned mothers, of remedies that worked, all burned by authorities, determined to control the narrative. But sometimes what they couldn't burn, they buried. Archaeologists have unearthed secret stashes of jars beneath monasteries, herbs, potions, even bones, hidden evidence of remedies priests once condemned, but still used in secret. If a woman survived too easily, neighbors whispered she was protected by devils. Survival itself was suspicious. A healthy birth was seen as witchcraft in disguise. Some women were dragged into courtrooms, while still pregnant, accused of carrying demon spawn because they endured labor too well. Their survival became their crime. The punishment? Execution. Both mother and unborn child, sentenced for imagined pacts with Satan. Even survival could be deadly. Some monks secretly recorded herbal remedies in coded prayers. Hidden within psalms were recipes for easing labor, written carefully between lines of holy scripture. These manuscripts were locked away for centuries, rediscovered only in recent decades. They reveal a truth the church wanted forgotten. Many remedies worked but were outlawed to keep. Women in suffering. Historians who translate these texts today are often horrified. Between the lines of prayers, they find instructions for inducing labor, easing contractions, and saving mothers, knowledge that could have changed history. But the greatest danger wasn't the herbs or the church, or even childbirth itself. It was what came after. Childbirth didn't end with delivery. Days later, many mothers developed raging fevers from infections doctors didn't understand. What they called bad air was actually bacteria, and it killed more women than the labor itself. Sheets were reused, blood unwashed, hands filthy. Each new delivery spread death faster. One woman's last breath infected the next's first. For mothers of the Middle Ages, survival was rare. Death was the expectation. And the most haunting truth? Even in death, your suffering wasn't finished. Childbirth didn't end when the baby arrived. For many women, it was only the beginning of another slow death. Within days, fever gripped their bodies, what we now know as infection. But in the Middle Ages, it was called childbed fever, and it killed silently, relentlessly. Doctors and midwives didn't know about germs. They reused the same filthy knives, touched open wounds with unwashed hands, and spread death from one woman to the next. To survive childbirth once was luck. To survive it twice was a miracle. Churchyards filled with the bodies of young mothers. Some villages buried more women in their 20s than in their 80s. Entire communities grew up motherless, raised in the shadow of graves. For every surviving child, there was often a widowed father, left with a newborn he didn't know how to feed. Many infants joined their mothers in the ground within weeks. Some women lived just long enough to meet their child, only to die hours later. Imagine holding your first breath of life while taking your last. For many, that was medieval motherhood. But even those who survived faced a torment no less cruel. Survival carried scars. Mothers who lived through one pregnancy often faced another within months, each labor weaker, each recovery slower, their bodies breaking long before their spirit gave in. Malnutrition made things worse. Bread stretched with sawdust, water fouled with rot, meat scarce. Pregnant women starved while carrying children, and when they gave birth, their bodies had nothing left to give. Women had no choice. Marriage meant endless pregnancies, whether their bodies could endure or not. Refusing a husband was heresy. Refusing God's will was sin. Each birth was another roll of the dice with death. Imagine starving, yet still expected to carry life. Many women gave birth while their own ribs showed through their skin. Some died simply because their bodies consumed themselves to keep the baby alive. And even for the few who survived both hunger and birth, a darker fate waited. Many survived the pain only to bury their newborns days later. Half of all babies born in the Middle Ages never saw their first birthday. Survival for the mother often meant grieving instead of nursing. Midwives kept silent tallies on church walls, marks for each death. Some walls show lines stretching for generations, silent testimonies of centuries of suffering. Those who survived both labor and grief carried the weight in their minds. Nightmares, depression, and despair. Though no one had words for them then, they called it melancholy. We call it trauma. Every birth chamber was haunted, not by spirits, but by memories. Women lived knowing each pregnancy could be their last. Every lullaby was sung against death's shadow. Some women lost their minds completely. Endless grief, endless pregnancies, endless fear. They looked into mirrors and saw ghosts staring back. But society had no mercy for broken mothers. In fact, it punished them. A mother too weak to work was abandoned. Villages whispered she was cursed. Hungry, grieving women were left to die in silence, while their children begged strangers for scraps. Orphanages filled with children whose mothers had been claimed by childbirth. Some grew up never knowing a mother's voice, raised instead by cold institutions that offered survival, not love. Many orphans were sold into servitude, traded like property. The death of a mother meant not just grief, but a lifetime of chains for her children. And all the while, laws written by men ensured nothing changed. Women remained trapped in a cycle of birth, death, and silence, generation after generation. A pregnant woman confessed her sins weekly, terrified that dying in childbirth without forgiveness would damn her soul. Imagine suffering in body and spirit, knowing salvation was never guaranteed. But the greatest betrayal wasn't from husbands, priests, or midwives. It came from the very walls meant to heal them. Medieval hospitals weren't places of healing. They were places of death. Filthy straw, crawling vermin, and foul air made recovery impossible. Women who entered rarely came out alive. Nuns whispered prayers as mothers gasped for air. No medicines, no cures, only faith. And faith could not fight infection. Mothers often died side by side, whispering prayers to each other. Some begged strangers to name their children before closing their eyes forever. In some epidemics, priests walked hospital rows, giving last rites by the dozen. So many women dying that prayers blurred into one endless chant. And when the candlelight finally went out, silence fell. Another ward emptied, another generation of mothers erased, their names lost, but their suffering written into our very blood. Pregnancy wasn't just a private struggle, it was a matter of law. Kings and priests dictated when women would bear children, how many and under what conditions. Survival was not her choice, it was the kingdom's demand. The church declared that childbirth pain was God's punishment for Eve's sin. To ease the agony with medicine or herbs was heresy. Women were ordered to suffer for faith, for penance, for salvation. Those who sought herbs for pain relief did so in secret. If caught, both mother and healer risked execution as witches. Mercy itself was treated as a crime. A woman who survived childbirth too easily was accused of witchcraft. If she lived when others died, suspicion followed her. Sometimes survival itself became a death sentence. In some towns, pregnant women who defied church rules were executed, hanged, or burned. Their unborn children condemned alongside them. Society made survival into rebellion. But even those who obeyed weren't spared. Their very healers became executioners. Physicians were more executioners than saviors. Without anesthesia, without sanitation, their knives cut into women's bodies. The cure often killed faster than the disease. Their tools were brutal, iron hooks to tear babies out, saws to split bone, knives to cut flesh. Most women bled to death on the table. Few called it healing, it was butchery. Worse, many procedures were performed by apprentices practicing on living women. For countless mothers, their wombs became classrooms, and their deaths became lessons. Superstition replaced science. Some midwives believed binding a belly with ropes could guide the baby. Instead, it crushed both mother and child. Faith and folklore replaced knowledge, and lives paid the price. The church cared less for mothers than for baptizing infants. Priests rushed to sprinkle holy water on babies while mothers bled out beside them. Salvation for the child mattered more than survival of the woman. But sometimes, even the child wasn't spared when medicine and faith demanded blood sacrifices. In desperate cases, surgeons performed crude cesareans, cutting women open without anesthesia, without hope of survival. The goal wasn't to save the mother, it was to rescue the child even if it meant her death. Crowds sometimes celebrated when a child was torn from a dying mother's body, calling it holy sacrifice. To them she was expendable. To them her death was divine duty. Doctors were rewarded not for saving mothers but for preserving heirs. Noble courts paid gold for surviving sons, while widowed fathers wept beside fresh graves. Even midwives knew their hands delivered more death than life. They whispered prayers with every birth, knowing each cry might be followed by silence. But the betrayal cut deeper still because sometimes mothers themselves were forced to choose death. Some women were forced to abandon newborns for their own survival. Councils of men decided who lived, who died, and mothers obeyed, even when their hearts broke. Convent doors became graveyards of the living, lined with abandoned infants. Some were taken in, but many died before morning frost. Mothers mourned silently, condemned for weakness, yet damned for obedience. Survivors carried guilt worse than death. Every prayer begged forgiveness, not for sins they committed, but for choices forced upon them by a system built to break them. Noble courts accused women of failing their duty when they died in childbirth. Families blamed mothers for weak wombs, for cursed blood, for failing to produce heirs as if death was their fault. Refusing pregnancy was rebellion. Some women who dared to resist were imprisoned, beaten, even executed. The system demanded obedience to death itself. Records show endless lists of names, mothers erased, reduced to tallies in dusty books. No stories, no voices, only numbers. Entire generations of women forgotten. But if you walk medieval streets in your mind, you'll see them, ghosts of mothers who walked silently to their graves. Every cobblestone carries their steps. Every church hides their screams. The cost wasn't just mothers, it was children left behind. Cradles empty, futures stolen. Generations were shaped not by love but by absence. Every medieval household carried these echoes. No one escaped the sound of mothers screaming. It was the soundtrack of life, the rhythm of death. And in the end, it wasn't just childbirth that killed women. It was the system itself, a web of faith, law, medicine, and silence that ensured every path led to suffering. In 2018, beneath one of London's oldest hospitals, workers made a discovery that froze archaeologists in horror. A mass grave of nearly 18,000 skeletons. Most were women. Many still carried unborn children. Proof that medieval pregnancy wasn't just dangerous, it was systematic slaughter. Some skeletons told stories more chilling than any record. Infants still nestled inside rib cages, locked forever in the moment of death. A mother and child buried as one because survival was never meant for either. The graves stretch in rows, endless, like tally marks of despair. Not accidents, not tragedies. Evidence of a world where women's deaths were expected, built into the very structure of life. But the bones revealed something even darker, because death left behind scars that never healed. When scientists tested the DNA, they uncovered something terrifying. Modern pregnancy complications, preeclampsia, hemorrhage, infertility, aren't just biology. They are inherited wounds. Genetic scars passed down from the women who died screaming in medieval beds. The maps match with horrifying precision. Regions that saw the worst. Medieval pregnancy deaths still suffer the highest maternal mortality today. The ghosts of medieval deathbeds still haunt hospital wards 700 years later. Every time a woman today faces pregnancy complications, she isn't alone. The shadows of her ancestors are there, reminders of a world that carved fear into her bloodline. Even medicine carries the scars. Many modern obstetric practices, emergency interventions, constant monitoring exist because medieval cruelty left human reproduction weaker than it was meant to be. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't genetic, it was human. The betrayal was deliberate. In 2019, documents uncovered in Vatican archives revealed chilling evidence the Church knew. Records show authorities tracked maternal deaths, concealed survival stories, and erased women who resisted. It wasn't neglect, it was control. Pregnancy wasn't misfortune, it was policy. Councils of men decided survival rates like quotas. Women were resources, wombs to be managed. Death was not a tragedy, it was expected sacrifice. Lists of names survive, thousands, tens of thousands reduced to ink and numbers. No graves marked, no voices remembered. Entire generations erased on parchment that still bleeds sorrow. Museums display birthing chairs, corsets, and surgical knives as curiosities. Few visitors realize they are torture devices disguised as culture, monuments to a genocide, hidden in plain sight. And yet, children look at these exhibits today, their reflections merging with shadows of the past. Proof that the victims never left us. Their blood still flows in our veins. Because the most haunting truth is this: pregnancy still kills like it did 700 years ago. Today, a woman dies every 2 minutes from pregnancy complications. Most in regions once scarred by medieval persecution. History isn't past. It's still happening, in different clothes. The gravestones are newer. The coffins are modern. But the story hasn't changed. Young mothers buried, children left motherless, families shattered, medieval patterns wearing modern masks. Scientists call it epigenetic memory, trauma etched into DNA. The screams of medieval mothers echo in our genes. The fear they felt shapes the health of their descendants centuries later. Every mother who survives today carries an unbroken chain of women behind her, those who died, those who lived, those who endured. Each birth is defiance, each survival a rebellion against centuries of suffering. When women march for maternal rights today, they don't march alone. They march with centuries of silenced voices. Every demand for safety echoes through 700 years of chains and screams. And then comes the final revelation, the most haunting symbol of all. In one grave they found her, a mother who died shielding her unborn child, arms wrapped tight even in death. Proof that love fought even against knives, disease, and fire. She died, her child died, but her final gesture was eternal. Protection, defiance, love carved into bone. The kind of love that persecution could never erase. Medieval cities look beautiful in postcards, with spires and castles reaching skyward. But beneath the stones lie oceans of bones. Beneath the beauty is blood. And our modern skylines? They stand atop the same soil. Cafes, hospitals, homes, all built over forgotten graves of women whose only crime was giving life. Every modern birth is more than biology, it's defiance. Every mother who lives sends shadows fleeing, proving survival is possible even in a world built on death. The dead do not vanish. They stand behind us, watching, hoping their agony will not be forgotten. Each living mother is their resurrection. Why wouldn't you survive a medieval pregnancy? Because survival was never meant for you. Because the system was built to bury you. And yet every child born today, every mother who survives, proves that death lost. Survival itself is rebellion, and it carries the voices of those who never got the chance. If you made it this far, you've walked through centuries of pain and silence. Subscribe to Nightmare Historians and tell us in the comments, if survival itself was rebellion, would you have made it through a medieval pregnancy?